The Mafia boss took her hand in front of everyone and said, "She's with me now." Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The clinking of crystal and the low hum of forced pleasantries were a familiar kind of prison. Elara Vance sat beside her husband, a perfect porcelain doll arranged just so, her smile as carefully curated as the diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. Julian had chosen it, just as he had chosen her dress, her shoes, and the vacant expression she was expected to wear. Across the opulent ballroom of the Grand Excelsior Hotel, men of immense wealth and questionable ethics traded influence like playing cards, their wives shimmering accessories to their power. Julian thrived in these environments, his own power magnified by the reflection in 100 admiring, or envious, eyes. For Elara, it was simply a more beautifully decorated cage, the bars forged from gold and social expectation. Tonight, the air felt particularly thin, the weight of Julian's hand on the back of her chair a constant, proprietary pressure. He was trying to close a deal with a shipping magnate, and his charm was spread as thick as the butter on the untouched bread rolls. But beneath the surface, a familiar irritation simmered, and she knew, with the gut-deep certainty of a long-suffering spouse, that it would soon find its target. Her gaze drifted, an act of silent rebellion, across the sea of black tuxedos and glittering gowns. It was then that she saw him. He was not at the center of any particular group, yet he was the center of his own gravity, a dark star pulling all light and attention into its orbit without demanding a thing. Dante Morty. The name was a whisper in rooms like this, a name spoken with a mixture of fear and reluctant respect. He ran Morty Holdings, a global conglomerate with its hands in everything from luxury real estate to logistics. But everyone knew the pristine corporate facade was built upon older, darker foundations. His family had run the city's underworld for generations, and Dante had inherited not just the boardroom but the throne. He sat at a corner table with two other men, his suit a shade of black that seemed to absorb the light, his posture relaxed but radiating a stillness that was more commanding than any grand gesture. He wasn't watching the room, he was observing it, his dark eyes missing nothing. For a brief, heart-stopping second, those eyes met hers. There was no smile, no flirtatious glint, just a flicker of quiet assessment, a moment of acknowledgement that felt more profound than any conversation she had endured all evening. She felt a strange jolt, a current of recognition for a feeling she had long forgotten, being seen. She quickly looked away, her cheeks warming, the pressure of Julian's hand suddenly feeling heavier. The shipping magnate eventually excused himself, leaving a void that Julian immediately filled with his displeasure. "You were a million miles away, Elara," he hissed, his smile never faltering for the benefit of any onlookers. "When Mr. Petrov was speaking about his new fleet, you were staring into space. Do you have any idea how that makes me look? It makes me look like I can't even command the attention of my own wife." The words were quiet, meant only for her, but they were as sharp as glass. "I was listening, Julian," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the string quartet. He cut her off with a flick of his wrist. "You just nothing. You are here to be an asset, a reflection of my success. That requires you to be present, engaged, charming. Is that really so much to ask in return for the life I provide you?" His voice dripped with a condescending patience that was far more insulting than outright anger. He leaned in closer, his cologne cloying and suffocating. "Look at you. Lost. You wouldn't last a day without me. You should remember to be more grateful." The public nature of the humiliation was the point. He was demonstrating his control, showing the world that even his beautiful wife was just another one of his possessions to be managed and disciplined. Her hands trembled in her lap, the silk of her dress feeling suddenly slick beneath her cold fingers. A knot of shame and fury tightened in her throat, choking the words she desperately wanted to scream. She risked another glance toward Dante Morty's table, a desperate search for a distraction, for any reality other than this one. He was watching them, not with overt curiosity, but with that same unnerving stillness, his gaze fixed not on her, but on Julian. There was no expression on his face, yet she could feel the weight of his disapproval from across the room. He saw the subtle cruelty, the tightening of Julian's jaw, the way her shoulders slumped in defeat. The entire ugly tableau was laid bare for him. Julian, oblivious, continued his tirade, his voice rising just enough to be noticeable to the tables nearest them. "Perhaps you need a reminder of your duties, starting with a smile. Smile, Alara. Show everyone how happy you are." The command was the final straw. It broke something inside her, a dam of carefully constructed composure that had been cracking for years. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cold cheek. The sight of it seemed to infuriate Julian further. "Oh, for God's sake!" Crying, "Here, you are determined to embarrass me, aren't you?" He reached for her arm, his grip hard and unforgiving, ready to haul her from the room like a misbehaving child. The hall, which had been a symphony of chatter, began to fall into a stilted silence as heads turned, sensing the ugly turn in the domestic drama. Then, a chair scraped softly against the marble floor. It was a quiet sound, but in the growing hush, it was as loud as a gunshot. Dante Morty was on his feet. He moved with an unhurried, predatory grace, his presence parting the crowd without a single word. Every eye in the room followed him as he crossed the floor, his path aimed directly at their table. Julian froze mid-sentence, his hand still clamped on Alara's arm, his face a mask of disbelief and confusion. The most powerful man in the city was walking toward him, and it was clear this was not a social call. Dante stopped before them, his shadow falling over the table. He did not look at Julian. His gaze was fixed solely on Alara, his dark eyes gentle, holding a question she could not decipher. He extended his hand, palm up, an offering. And then he spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried a quiet authority that cut through the tension and silenced the entire hall. "The argument is over." He waited a beat, his eyes never leaving hers. Slowly, as if waking from a long nightmare, she pulled her arm from Julian's slackening grip. The sting of her husband's fingers was already fatting as she placed her trembling hand into Dante. His grip was warm, firm, and impossibly steady. He wrapped his fingers around hers, a gesture of finality, of possession. He finally turned his gaze to Julian, his expression unreadable but utterly dismissive, and he delivered the final blow with one quiet sentence. "She's with me now." The silence that followed was absolute, a thick, breathless vacuum where 100 conversations had just been. Julian Vance, a man who built his empire on aggressive takeovers and hostile negotiations, stood utterly neutered, his mouth slightly agape, his face paling to a sickly white. The world had just tilted on its axis, and he was the only one who hadn't been prepared for the shift. Dante Morty did not wait for a response. Julian's opinion was irrelevant. With his hand still securely holding Alara, he turned and began to walk away from the table, leading her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her legs moved on their own accord, her mind a whirlwind of shock, terror, and a bewildering, soaring sense of liberation. Whispers erupted in their wake, a tidal wave of speculation and scandal crashing against the shores of the room's stunned stillness. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her back, but the only thing she was truly aware of was the steady pressure of Dante's hand around hers, a solid anchor in the storm he had just unleashed. He led her through the grand ballroom, past the gawking faces of people she had known for years, people who had witnessed Julian's casual cruelties and said nothing. Dante's path was clear, a silent command parting the sea of onlookers. No one dared to get in his way. As they reached the grand lobby, the cold night air that swept in from the open doors felt like a cleansing breath. He guided her to a black sedan idling at the curb, a driver holding the rear door open. The car was sleek, anonymous, and exuded the same understated power as the man beside her. He helped her inside before sliding in next to her, the door closing with a soft, heavy thud that sealed them off from the world they had just left behind. The car pulled away from the curb smoothly, melting into the city's river of lights. Inside, the silence was different from the one in the ballroom. This was a calm, insulated quiet, broken only by the soft hum of the engine. Alara finally let go of the breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her body trembling with the adrenaline of the last 10 minutes. She looked down at their hands, still joined on the plush leather seat between them. He had not let go. She slowly pulled her hand back, and he released it without resistance. She wrapped her arms around herself, a futile attempt to hold the shattered pieces of her life together. "What? What did you just do?" she finally managed to ask, her voice a fragile whisper. Dante turned his head to look at her, his profile carved from shadow and streetlight. "I ended an unpleasant situation," he said simply, as if he had done nothing more than close a window to shut out a draft. His calmness was both terrifying and deeply reassuring. You can't just claim someone's wife in the middle of a charity gala," she said, the absurdity of the situation crashing down on her. "Julian, he's my husband." The word tasted like ash in her mouth. "Is he?" Dante's voice was low, devoid of judgment, a simple question of fact. From where I was sitting, he looked more like a warden. The accuracy of the statement stole her breath. He had seen it all, understood it all in a single glance from across a crowded room. She had spent years trying to hide the truth, to maintain the facade of a perfect marriage, and this stranger had dismantled it with a few words and a single gesture. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, a new wave of fear creeping in. She had just traded one powerful man's control for another's, and she had no idea what the terms of this new arrangement were. "Somewhere safe," he replied. "Somewhere you can think." The car journeyed on, leaving the glittering towers of the city center behind and heading toward the quieter, more exclusive residential areas nestled in the hills. They pulled up to a private elevator in an underground garage, rising silently through the building until they emerged directly into a sprawling penthouse apartment. The space was minimalist and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city below. It was a beautiful cage, but a cage nonetheless. He led her into the vast living area. "You can stay here, no one will find you. My housekeeper has prepared the guest suite for you." He gestured to a hallway. "It has its own entrance. You will have complete privacy." He was treating her not as a conquest, but as a refugee. He walked over to a sleek, modern bar and poured 2 glasses of water, handing one to her. Her hand was still shaking, and the cool glass felt steadying. "I don't understand," she said, looking at him, really looking at him for the first time without the filter of 100 other people. His eyes were darker up close, intense but not unkind. "Why would you do that? For me? You don't even know me." He took a slow sip of his water, his gaze holding hers over the rim of the glass. "I know what I saw," he said. "I saw a man trying to break something beautiful because he was too small to appreciate it. My father taught me many things, some of them brutal. But he always said that a man's true character is revealed in how he treats those he has power over. Your husband failed that test." His phone buzzed then, a discreet vibration on the marble countertop where he'd placed it. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. It was Julian. The name flashed on the screen, a digital shackle from a life she had just escaped. Dante silenced the call with a sweep of his thumb, but a moment later it buzzed again, and again. With a sigh of profound weariness, Dante finally answered it, putting it on speakerphone so she could hear. "What do you want, Vance?" Dante's voice was cold steel. Julian's voice came through, shrill with rage and humiliation. "You son of a bitch, who the hell do you think you are? You bring my wife back right now, or I swear to God I will ruin you. I will call the police. I will call every reporter in this city." There was a pause, and Dante's silence seemed to unnerve Julian more than any threat could have. "Did you get that, Morty? You're finished." Dante was perfectly still. He glanced at Alara, a silent question in his eyes, asking for a permission he already had. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He had started this, and only he could finish it. "Listen to me very carefully, Vance," Dante said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling register that promised violence more effectively than any shout. "You will not call her. You will not look for her. You will not speak her name again. From this moment on, Alara is under my protection. If you make one move to challenge that, the consequences will be severe and they will be permanent. Your reporters and your police will not be able to find all the pieces of you. Do you understand me?" The line was silent for a long moment, the sound of Julian's panicked breathing the only reply. Then, with a choked sound of impotent fury, the call ended. Dante set the phone down. The threat was gone. The room was quiet again. He had drawn a line in the sand, and on one side stood the crumbling edifice of her old life, and on the other, the terrifying, unknown continent of this new one. And in between them stood Dante Morty, her unlikely and very dangerous savior. The days that followed were a study in suspended animation. Alara existed in the hushed, climate-controlled perfection of Dante's penthouse, a ghost-haunting rooms that were too large and too empty. The guest suite was a sanctuary of muted colors and luxurious fabrics, with a balcony that overlooked the sprawling city, a constant reminder of the world she was now completely detached from. Dante was true to his word. He afforded her a level of privacy and respect that was utterly alien to her. He was a phantom presence in the sprawling apartment, leaving for business before she woke and often returning late after she had retired to her room. They would sometimes pass in the long, art-lined hallways, their encounters brief and marked by a quiet, simmering tension. He would nod, his eyes searching hers for a moment, and ask if she needed anything. She would shake her head, murmur that she was fine, and retreat. The truth was, she was far from fine. She was adrift, caught between the wreckage of her past and a future she could not begin to imagine. The absence of Julian's constant criticism, his controlling presence, and his suffocating expectations left a void that was both liberating and terrifying. She had forgotten how to simply be, how to make a decision, even one as small as what to eat for lunch, without running it through the filter of his approval. One evening, unable to sleep, she found herself in the main living area, drawn by the glittering tapestry of city lights below. She was standing before the vast window when he entered the room, moving with the silent tread she was coming to recognize. He had shed his suit jacket, his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and he held a glass of amber liquid in his hand. For a moment, they stood in a comfortable silence, two solitary figures dwarfed by the cityscape. "It's beautiful," she said softly, her voice little more than a whisper, "but it feels a world away." He came to stand beside her, not too close, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Sometimes distance is necessary," he said, his voice a low rumble. "It gives you perspective." He took a sip of his drink, his gaze fixed on the view. "Have you thought about what you want to do?" The question was gentle, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. What did she want? No one had asked her that in nearly a decade. Her wants had been subsumed by Julian's ambitions, her dreams tailored to fit the narrow confines of his world. She had wanted to be an art historian once, to spend her days in the quiet, reverent halls of museums, but Julian had scoffed at the idea, calling it a useless hobby for a woman who didn't need to work. She had let that part of herself wither and die, along with so many others. I don't know," she confessed, the admission feeling like a profound failure. "I haven't known for a very long time." He turned to face her then, his expression serious. "You are not a prisoner here, Alara. When Julian's lawyers eventually contact you about the divorce, I will provide you with the best legal team in the country. After that, if you want a new life, somewhere far away from here, I will arrange it. A new name, a new home, enough money to live comfortably for the rest of your life. You would be free." The offer was staggering, a clean break, a chance to reinvent herself entirely. It was a path to safety, to anonymity. It was everything a rational woman in her position should want. But as she looked at him, at the quiet strength in his eyes, the subtle lines of weariness around them, she felt a powerful, irrational urge to stay. She was beginning to realize that the safety he offered was not just a physical shield from Julian, it was an emotional one, too. In his presence, she felt the shattered pieces of herself slowly, tentatively begin to realign. "And if I don't want to run away?" she asked, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Surprise, interest. "Then you stay," he said simply, "for as long as you wish." Their quiet, separate routines began to bleed into one another. He started leaving later in the mornings, taking his coffee at the kitchen island while she ate her breakfast. He would tell her about his legitimate businesses, about a difficult negotiation for a new hotel in Tokyo, or a logistics challenge in the port of Singapore. He spoke of it with a passion and intelligence that was captivating. In turn, she found herself talking about art, about the impressionists she loved and the history of the pieces that decorated his own walls. He listened, truly listened, with an attentiveness that made her feel as though her opinions were the most important thing in the world. One night, he came home to find her curled on the sofa, a large art history book open in her lap. He stopped in the doorway, watching her for a moment, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He walked to the bar, and this time he poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to her as he sat in the armchair opposite her. "Tell me about it," he said, gesturing to the book. And so she did. She spoke for over an hour, her initial hesitation melting away into genuine enthusiasm, her hands gesturing as she described the brushstrokes of Monet and the revolutionary vision of Degas. Dante watched her, his gaze unwavering, and she felt a part of her soul, long dormant, stir and awaken. The outside world, however, refused to remain at bay. Julian, it turned out, was not only arrogant but foolish. Denied direct access to Alara, he chose to attack Dante in the only way he knew how, through business. He started a smear campaign, feeding anonymous, damaging tips to financial journalists about Morty Holdings, trying to spook investors and drive down stock prices. It was a petty, desperate move, and one that gravely underestimated his opponent. One afternoon, while Dante was out, Ilara was on her balcony when she saw a nondescript van parked across the street. It had been there for hours. A man sat inside, occasionally lifting a camera with a long lens. They were watching her. A cold dread washed over her. Julian was not just fighting a corporate war, he was trying to get to her. She called Dante, her voice trembling. He was calm, his voice a steadying presence over the line. "Stay inside. Lock the doors. I'm on my way." He arrived less than 20 minutes later, not in his usual sedan, but in an armored SUV flanked by another. When he stepped into the apartment, the mask of the calm CEO was gone. In its place was the cold, lethal focus of the Mafia boss. "He hired a private investigator," Dante said, his voice tight with a controlled fury. "A clumsy amateur. My men are taking care of it now." "Taking care of it," she whispered, her heart pounding. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the dangerous reality of his world. "Your husband needs to be taught a final, more permanent lesson about boundaries," he said. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. He was not just protecting her, he was preparing to eliminate a threat. That night, the tension between them reached a breaking point. He stood by the window, staring out at the city, his shoulders rigid with a barely contained violence. She could feel the storm raging within him, the conflict between the civilized man he presented to the world and the predator that lay beneath. She walked over to him, her fear eclipsed by a powerful, undeniable connection to this complex, dangerous man. She reached out and placed her hand on his arm. His muscles were corded steel beneath his shirt. He flinched, not from her touch, but from the gentleness of it in his world of brutality. He turned to face her, his eyes dark with 1,000 unspoken emotions. "You should be afraid of me, Ilara," he rasped, his voice rough. "I'm not the good man you think I am." "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I've seen what a good man does. I've spent 10 years being afraid. I'm not afraid anymore." And with a courage she didn't know she possessed, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was hesitant at first, a question. Then he groaned, a low, guttural sound, and his arms came around her, pulling her flush against him. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry, desperate, a release of weeks of unspoken tension, of danger and desire. It was not gentle. It was a raw, primal claiming, a collision of two worlds. And in that moment, Ilara knew there was no going back. She had not just accepted his protection, she had stepped into his world, and she had done it by her own choice. The kiss shattered the fragile barrier that had existed between them, unleashing a torrent of emotion that had been held in check for weeks. Dante's hands tangled in her hair, his mouth devouring hers with a raw hunger that spoke of profound loneliness and fierce possession. This was not the calculated move of a powerful man taking what he wanted. It was the desperate act of a man finding an oasis in a desolate landscape. Ilara met his intensity with her own, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. For the first time in a decade, she felt not just desired, but seen, her own needs and passions acknowledged and matched. The years of being a pristine, untouched accessory for Julian melted away in the searing heat of Dante's touch. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her from the living room, down the hall, and into the sanctuary of his bedroom, a space she had never before entered. The room was like him, minimalist, masculine, and immaculate, dominated by a large bed and another panoramic window showcasing the glittering, indifferent city. He laid her gently on the cool sheets, his eyes never leaving hers, dark pools of conflict and overwhelming desire. He was giving her a final chance to retreat, to reconsider the precipice on which they stood. But she had already made her choice. She reached up, her fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw, a silent answer to his unspoken question. That was all the confirmation he needed. He shed his clothes with an economy of motion, revealing a body honed by discipline, a canvas of faint scars that told stories she did not yet know, but was no longer afraid to learn. He undressed her with a reverence that was a stark contrast to the urgency of their kiss, his fingers lingering on her skin as if memorizing her. When they finally came together, it was a cataclysm, a fusion of two solitary souls. It was more than just a physical act. It was a pact, a sealing of the unspoken promise he had made in the restaurant. He was hers, and she was his. In the quiet aftermath, as they lay tangled in the sheets, the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling. A new kind of intimacy settled over them, more profound than the passion that had just passed. He propped himself up on one elbow, his fingers gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I meant what I said," he murmured, his voice low and serious. "This life, my life, it's not a fairy tale, it's dangerous. People get hurt. I have enemies, Alara, and by being with me, you will have them too." He was not trying to scare her. He was giving her the unvarnished truth, a testament to the respect he held for her. He was offering her an out, even now, after they had crossed this irrevocable line. "I can still do it," he continued, his gaze intense. "I can set you up somewhere new, Paris, Florence, wherever you want. A new identity, a quiet life where you can finally study your art and be free from all of this. Free from Julian, free from me." It was the ultimate test. He was laying her freedom at her feet, a gift he was willing to give even if it meant losing her. She looked into his eyes and saw the truth of his words, the genuine sacrifice he was prepared to make for her happiness, for her safety. She thought of the life he described, a quiet, peaceful existence surrounded by beauty and free of fear. A few weeks ago, she would have wept with gratitude for such an offer. But now, the thought of a life without him, without this dangerous, complicated, and utterly compelling man, felt like the hollowest kind of freedom. "My life with Julian was safe on the surface," she said softly, her voice steady. "I was insulated by his money and his name, but it was a different kind of danger. It was the danger of losing yourself piece by piece until there's nothing left but an empty shell. I was dying a slow death in that perfect house. With you, I feel alive. Even if it's dangerous, it's real. I'm not running anymore, Dante. I choose to stay. I choose you." A wave of relief so profound it was almost painful washed over his features. He lowered his head and rested his forehead against hers, breathing her in. "Then you are my family now," he said, the words a solemn vow. "And I protect my family. No matter the cost." The cost, they would soon discover, was escalating. Julian Vance, pushed to the brink of financial ruin and social irrelevance by Dante's retaliatory strikes against his company, made his final, fatal mistake. Consumed by a narcissistic rage that blinded him to the consequences, he decided that if he couldn't have Alara, he would destroy the man who had taken her. He gathered what little evidence he could fabricate and what few rumors he could substantiate about Dante's less-than-legal operations, and took them to a rival family, the Falcons. It was a desperate, suicidal act, an outsider trying to play the intricate, deadly game of mob politics. He offered them information, hoping to incite a war that would consume Dante Morty, naively believing the Falcons would protect him for his service. It was a gross miscalculation of the codes that, however brutal, governed their world. Betraying your own was one thing. Using outsiders to settle scores was an entirely different and unforgivable sin. The news of Julian's betrayal reached Dante late one night. He took the call in his study, and Alara, woken by the chillingly quiet intensity of his voice, found him standing by his desk, the phone clenched in his fist. The transformation in him was terrifying. The sophisticated CEO, the tender lover, had vanished completely. In his place stood the unyielding Don of the Morty family, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury, his eyes as hard and merciless as chips of obsidian. He hung up the phone and looked at her, and for the first time she felt a sliver of the fear he had warned her about, not for herself, but for what he was about to do. "Julian went to the Falcons," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "He tried to sell them information. He tried to start a war using you as the justification." He walked over to the bar and poured a drink, his movements precise and deliberate. "He has involved my family. He has put my people at risk. He has crossed a line from which there is no return." He downed the whiskey in one swallow, the glass making a sharp click as he set it back on the counter. "I have to handle this," he said, his gaze meeting hers in the reflection in the dark window. "The old way." The meaning was unmistakable. This was not a business problem to be solved with lawyers and contracts. This was a matter of family, of honor, and of blood. Julian Vance had signed his own death warrant. "I have to go out," Dante said, turning to face her fully. "I need you to stay here. You will be safe." He came to her and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "No matter what you hear in the coming days, know that I did it to protect you, to protect us." He gave her one last, hard kiss, a final branding of his claim, and then he turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the silent, luxurious apartment, the protector heading out into the night to become the killer. Alara did not sleep that night. She sat by the window, watching the endless stream of headlights on the distant highways, each one a separate story, a separate life, all of them blissfully unaware of the dark currents that moved beneath the city's glittering surface. She did not know the details of what Dante was doing, and she did not want to. She only knew that he had gone to excise a cancer from their lives, and that the man who returned to her might be changed by the act, just as she was being changed by her acceptance of it. 2 days later, the news broke. It was a small item on a financial news network, easily missed. Julian Vance, the disgraced corporate raider, had disappeared. His car was found abandoned near a private airfield, the keys still in the ignition. The leading theory, the news anchor said with professional detachment, was that he had fled the country to escape his mounting debts and pending investigations for corporate fraud, charges that had coincidentally been anonymously leaked to the authorities in the past 48 hours. There was no mention of foul play. There were no loose ends. It was a clean, quiet erasure, a life simply deleted. A wave of complex emotions washed over Alara, a profound, shuddering relief, a pang of guilt for the life that had been extinguished, and a deep, unsettling acceptance. Julian was gone. The threat was over. She was truly, finally free. Dante returned that evening. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than before. He said nothing of where he had been or what he had done, and she did not ask. The unspoken truth hung in the air between them, a permanent fixture in the foundation of their new life. He simply came to her, wrapped his arms around her, and held her, his head buried in her hair. It was not a gesture of victory, but of quiet solace, a silent acknowledgement of the price of their safety. In that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. She had accepted all of him, the protector, the businessman, the lover, and the killer. Because he, in turn, had accepted all of her, the broken wife, the hesitant woman, and the strong partner he was helping her become. With the shadow of Julian gone, Alara began to build a new life, not away from Dante, but beside him. She enrolled in a master's program for art history at the city university, her passion for the subject reignited. Dante encouraged her, proud of the fire he saw returning to her eyes. She also began to take an interest in his legitimate businesses, specifically the philanthropic arm of his foundation, which managed art acquisitions for museums and funded scholarships for young artists. Her knowledge was invaluable, and soon she was not just his partner in life, but a trusted advisor and a force for good within his empire, softening its hard edges with her grace and intelligence. She became the queen to his king, respected and, in a way, feared in her own right, not for any capacity for violence, but for her quiet influence on the most powerful man in the city. Their life settled into a new rhythm, one defined by mutual respect and a deep, abiding love that had been forged in crisis. The danger was always there, a low hum beneath the surface of their daily lives, but it no longer terrified her. It was simply a part of the world they inhabited, a world where she was no longer a victim, but an active participant. She had found her strength, not in spite of Dante's power, but because his unwavering belief in her had allowed her to rediscover her own. One evening, months later, they were hosting a small, private dinner for his most trusted capos and their wives. It was an intimate gathering within the walls of their penthouse, a meeting of the two sides of his world. Alara moved through the room with an easy confidence, a gracious hostess who was both warm and regal. Dante watched her, a quiet pride in his gaze. He saw one of his captains speaking to her, his tone slightly condescending, underestimating the woman beside the boss. He watched as Alara smiled, said something quiet and sharp that made the man's eyes widen in surprise, and then nod in genuine respect before moving away. She had learned the language of power, and she spoke it fluently. Later that night, after their guests had departed, they stood on the balcony, the city spread out before them like a carpet of jewels. A cool breeze stirred the air, a welcome relief. The silence between them was comfortable, complete. He reached for her, his hand covering hers where it rested on the cool stone of the railing. It was the same gesture from that first night in the restaurant, the one that had started it all. But this time it was different. It was not a rescue. It was not a claim. It was a simple, profound statement of partnership, a silent promise of a shared future, built on the ashes of what came before. "I love you, Alara," he said, his voice a low murmur against the vastness of the night. I know, she whispered, turning to him, her smile luminous in the moonlight. And I love you. In the heart of a dangerous world, surrounded by secrets and shadows, they had found their sanctuary not in a place but in each other. And it was more than enough. 2 years later, the light was different. It was softer, diffused through the high, frosted glass ceilings of the city's most prestigious modern art gallery. It was a benevolent light, illuminating the faces of patrons who murmured in hushed, appreciative tones, their expressions ones of genuine admiration. This was Alara's world now, a space she had not just entered, but had built. The exhibit, a daring retrospective of a forgotten female surrealist, was her curatorial debut, and it had been lauded by critics as the most important cultural event of the season. She moved through the elegant crowd with a quiet, unassailable grace, her simple black dress, a statement of confidence that outshone any of the glittering gowns she once wore like armor. She was no longer a reflection of a powerful man's status. She was a source of her own light, and people were drawn to its warmth and brilliance. Morty watched her from across the room, standing in a shadowed alcove, a silent observer in the world she commanded. To the uninitiated, he was merely the wealthy benefactor, the husband of the brilliant curator, but those who knew better. They saw the way his men were positioned discreetly throughout the gallery, their presence an invisible but impenetrable shield. They saw the deference in the eyes of the city's mayor as he shook Dante's hand. But all Dante saw was his wife. He remembered the woman in the grand restaurant, her spirit so close to being extinguished, her trembling hand reaching for his as a lifeline. The woman before him now was the full, breathtaking realization of the person he had seen a glimpse of that night. He had not saved her. He had simply opened the door to the cage, and she had found her own wings. An older woman, a doyenne of the city's high society who had once looked at Alara with pity at Julian's side, now approached her with a fawning smile. "Alara, my dear, it is simply magnificent. You have such an eye, a true gift." Alara's smile was genuine, gracious, but firm. "Thank you, Beatrice. The artist had the gift. I'm just fortunate enough to be her translator." The woman was dismissed with a politeness so complete it was its own form of power, a skill Alara had honed to a razor's edge. Dante felt a surge of pride so fierce it was a physical ache in his chest. He had torn down Alara's old world to protect her, but she was the one who had built this new one, brick by brick, with her own talent and determination. Her world had, in turn, reshaped his. The Morty family name, once associated exclusively with fear and shadow, was now increasingly linked to philanthropy, culture, and urban renewal, all under her quiet guidance. She was the heart of his empire, and her influence made it stronger, more resilient, than brute force ever could. Later, as the crowd began to thin, she found him in their shared alcove, a glass of champagne in her hand. She leaned against him, her body fitting perfectly against his, a gesture of easy intimacy that still felt like a miracle to him. "Tired?" he asked, his voice a low rumble meant only for her. She shook her head, her eyes shining as she looked out at her success. "No, I feel like I just woke up." He understood completely. He had been sleepwalking through his own life before her, a king in a cold, empty castle. She had brought life, warmth, and color to his monochrome existence. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of her jaw. "I am so proud of you, Alara." Her smile softened, her gaze turning inward to the private world only they shared. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dante. You gave me the one thing I never had, the safety to be myself." He shook his head slightly. "I only cleared the field. You were the one who knew how to make the garden grow." His gaze drifted to the center of the room, where a young family was looking at a painting, the parents explaining it to their small child. A thought, a want he had long suppressed, surfaced with a gentle insistence. He looked back at Alara, a question in his eyes. She saw it, her deep understanding of him reading the subtle shift in his expression. Her hand came up to cover his on her cheek. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. He hesitated for a moment, the Mafia boss unused to voicing such a vulnerable domestic hope. "I was thinking," he began, his voice quiet, "that this gallery is beautiful. This life we have is perfect, but a home is not truly a home until it is filled with the sound of family." Alara's breath caught in her throat, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of pure joy. It was a future she had dreamed of but had never dared to ask for, a final, beautiful piece of a life she never thought she would have. She had been so focused on reclaiming herself, She hadn't realized they were ready to create something new together. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Dante, a family." He leaned down and captured her lips in a kiss that was not filled with the desperate passion of their beginning, but with the deep, steady, and infinite promise of their future. It was a kiss of profound peace, of shared dreams and absolute certainty. As they pulled apart, he took her hand in his fingers lacing through hers. The gesture was the same, the man was the same, but the meaning had evolved. He was not taking her hand to lead her away from a ruined life. He was holding it to walk beside her, as equals, into the beautiful, bright, and boundless future they had built together. A king and his queen, finally home. His ride home from the gallery was a silent, shared exhale. The city lights streaked past the tinted windows of the sedan, a watercolor of their shared history, from the desperate escape, that first night, to this triumphant, peaceful return. Dante had taken her hand again as they left the gallery, but this time she was the one who initiated it, her fingers sliding into his with a confident ease that was now second nature. He had held it loosely, a quiet testament to the fact that she was not his possession to be led, but his partner, choosing to walk the same path. In the insulated quiet of the car, he turned to her, the passing streetlights playing across the strong planes of his face. "Beatrice was terrified of you tonight," he said, a low note of amusement in his voice. Alara laughed softly, the sound rich and free. "She should be. She once told me my only assets were my face and my husband's patience." I simply reminded her that I had acquired new assets. He smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that still made her heart ache with love. "And what are those?" he prompted. "A mind of my own," she said, her voice dropping, becoming more intimate, "and a husband with no patience at all for people like her." His hand tightened on hers, his thumb stroking the back of her palm. "I meant it, Dante," she said, her tone serious now, returning to their conversation on the balcony. "About a family." His gaze met hers, his dark eyes holding a depth of emotion he rarely showed the world. "I know you did," he answered, his voice rough, "and I have never wanted anything more." The words were a quiet confession, an admission of a vulnerability he afforded to no one else. The king had everything he could ever want, except for this one simple, profound thing, and now they would build that too. 3 years later, the sunlight was different again. It was the warm, dappled light of a Sunday morning, streaming through the leaves of an old oak tree and onto the lush green lawn of a sprawling stone house nestled in the countryside, far from the city's glare. The penthouse had been a fortress, a necessary sanctuary for a dangerous time. This house, with its rambling rose gardens and wide-open doors, was a home. Alara sat on a stone bench, a sketchbook in her lap, not drawing, but simply watching. A few feet away, a small boy with his father's dark, curly hair and her determined blue eyes was crouched in the grass, his brow furrowed in serious concentration. He was carefully placing a ladybug on a leaf, his chubby fingers surprisingly gentle. Dante knelt beside him, his soutane tie armor of the weekday replaced by a simple linen shirt and trousers. He was pointing at the insect, his voice a low, patient murmur as he explained something about its spots. Their son, Marco, named for the formidable patriarch whose legacy Dante had both honored and transcended, looked up at his father with absolute adoration before turning his attention back to his tiny charge. This was the scene she sketched in her mind, the image she would hold on to forever. Her dangerous, powerful husband, the man who could command armies and topple empires, completely and utterly captivated by the simple magic of his son discovering the world. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming roses. Marco finally managed to coax the ladybug onto the leaf, and he looked up with a triumphant gasp, his face breaking into a radiant smile as he held it up for his father's inspection. Dante's answering smile was one of pure, unadulterated joy. He scooped their son into his arms, Marco's delighted squeals echoing in the peaceful morning air, and walked over to Alara, settling on the bench beside her. Marco immediately leaned over, thrusting the leaf into his mother's face. "Look, Mama, bug! I see my love," she said, kissing his soft cheek. "He's very handsome." Dante's arm came around her, pulling her and their son into his side. They sat there for a long time, the three of them, a perfect, self-contained universe under the old oak tree. The world of threats and rivals, of clandestine meetings and brutal necessities, still existed. It was a part of their reality, an ocean whose tides Dante would always have to navigate. But here, in this garden, they had created an island, a permanent sanctuary of their own making. He looked at Alara over the top of their son's head, his eyes conveying a lifetime of gratitude, of love, of wonder. "A long way from the Grand Excelsior," he murmured, his voice thick with the memory of the trembling, broken woman he had first taken by the hand. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full to the point of breaking. "You said you were taking me somewhere safe," she whispered, looking at her husband and her child, at the life they had forged from the ashes of her old one. "You did." He had taken her hand in front of everyone to save her from a life of gilded emptiness, and in doing so, had found the one thing his own world of power and shadows could never provide. He had found his home.